What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Well, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host,
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. Yeah. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Iconic or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate you checking us out. Show's brought to you by a couple of sponsors. Delete Me. The tech giants are making a fortune selling your personal information to all kinds of online outlets. Delete Me removes your personal information like your name, your address, your age, phone number, things like that. Removing personal information from data broker websites reduces your online footprint and removes Google search results. So Delete Me has been featured all over the place. Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NPR, CNET. They've removed 20 million personal listings. They'll probably be able to help you out. Check the link in the description to see if they can, to see how Delete Me can work for you. And we're also brought to you by Fiverr. If you want to outsource some of your work, or you just need specialized help with a project you're working on, you need to check out Fiverr. They have a network of thousands of freelance experts in business and design, programming, tech, digital marketing, music, audio, you name it, they've got it. If you need someone to build out a website for you or help grow your current digital marketing campaign, you can find thousands of people to work on your project for a fixed price at Fiverr. And also our last sponsor is Cash Advance. We are living through a strange time filled with an unbelievable amount of uncertainty. We don't know what the world's going to look like a week from now, let alone a month from now. If you find yourself in a financial emergency and in need of money right away, at least you have an option with Cash Advance. You can register online, submit your request, and receive an answer within minutes to see where you stand. It's not always the greatest option in the world, but listen, you've got an option. If the money runs out and things are tough, check out Cash Advance. And of course, with all the sponsors, any support for them works to support the show as well. So check the links in the description. And man, we have got a crazy show. If you are unfamiliar with David McMillan's story, you're going to get a taste of it now, but I'm going to tell you in advance, an hour isn't going to do it, because if you go to Sean Atwood's channel, who we've had on the show before, you will find that they have done at least 12 hours of recording together on a series of episodes to show and talk about David's crazy, his crazy career. David McMillan is here. If you can even do it in just a quick 30 seconds or so, tell us who the hell you are and why you've got the craziest life story of anybody I've ever met in my entire life.
Well, thanks, Charlie. That's some kind of an introduction because you must have seen some crazy people during your time. I started out as a cameraman and I went into advertising. And I should tell you that I'm 64 now, but back in the 70s, the whole attitude to the world and who we are and what we do was different. It was the kind of post-counterculture from the 60s. What I'm getting at is this. We didn't, my friends and I, regard governments as anything but people who had the reins. And law breaking was not considered a particularly big deal, but on the other hand, we were sort of hippies. In one of the first little law-breaking business, I guess, was a corner grocery store. It sold organic vegetables on one side of the counter, but under the counter it had some farm-grown marijuana, and there wasn't even a kind of question. It didn't really, things really didn't change. Anyway, I shouldn't stray. I steamed straight into smuggling because pretty much that seemed the most challenging thing. There were borders, there were countries. They shouldn't mean anything. Hard drugs, yeah. Everybody should have the freedom to make their big mistakes and learn from it. Now, of course, there's still people today who call me a ruthless scumbag, but, we try to help people as well. But I won't, Charlie, go on with any self-justifying nonsense. Let's go straight into it. I started running hash from India and a little from Lebanon in my 20s. The war broke out there in Lebanon, so I moved on. It seemed to happen to me a bit, Charlie. Wars were breaking out, which wasn't necessarily, the worst thing that ever happened, but it made it tricky. And smuggling from, I grew up in the UK, and but I moved to Australia in my early years. And in fact, I had a little kids' TV show reading kids' news on television there. So in Australia, I probably brought in, not huge amounts, not tons, but certainly kilos of coke and heroin and hash. And the real interest for me was trying to figure out ways through customs. And in Australia at the time, and they still do, they were quite sort of ruthless. But my early efforts were really clumsy too, I should say. I mean, I came back from India with 6 kilos of hash in a 1950s Grundig radio that I'd torn the tubes out of it. I mean, there was nothing in that bag except this huge old radio, and the customs guy, he was of an older generation. He didn't want to arrest me. He sort of spun the dials on this whole thing and they kept spinning. He let me go, and I thought I was the greatest smuggler in town. So I went on. I ended up getting a courier network. There were probably 10 or 15 of them. That was at my first wife's insistence. Don't know whether it was such a great idea. I used to worry about them so much. I'd be on the flights with them. Of course, I was in first class and they were in business, but even so. And that, I mean, it was really quite the high life. We even had try to replicate an old Silk Road journey from Hong Kong in 3 huge mobile homes that crossed through the borders through Afghanistan and Alexander the Great's old route. And we'd stop and set up huge tents. And we had, probably 15 people with us, not just cooks, but somebody who was in charge of the music. We brought our soap maker because he wanted to find particular spices. And, but the ethos at the time was non-violent. And I always thought of it as a personal failure if I couldn't devise a solution that didn't come down to shootouts. And as as I learnt in later years, when guns were around, no good comes of it. It might sound an obvious thing to say, but especially in the Middle East and Far East, they're firing the things in celebration at weddings and birthdays. Those bullets go up and they've got to come down somewhere. Right. Now, there was a huge arrest there in Australia, a 6-month trial. The jury went kind of wild. They couldn't make a decision. They demanded to go on a picnic. They wanted to take the confiscated cash with them, and the judge played along, but found me guilty of 1 of 12 counts. I did a big stretch in there, and because of a helicopter escape, which I'll go into sometime if you like.
Yes, please.
Well, I mean, there were a lot of helicopter escapes. People knew we had money. Out of the 12 of us, 8 people took the Queen shilling, as we say in the UK, and went state's evidence, as you say in the US. And the jury were confused by this. You know, they were asking the judge, wait a minute, some guys just come on and admitted to running dope, selling on the street, being under police protection as he continued his business. Is he in jail? The judge had to explain to them, no, he's not. He's in exchange for his testimony. Oh, they didn't like that at all. No. So, but the effect of being convicted put me into, and the helicopter escape, it put me into supermax prisons. And one of the ones there was a concrete minimalist architecture monstrosity with electronic doors and 2-inch thick glass windows, mostly filled. It only had 48 people in it in 6 sections, but mostly filled with complete nutcases. They had a day room where you could go during the day. I guess just an example of one day there was a dispute between 2 murderers. Charlie, they're kind of very competitive murderers. If one had killed more than the other, there's no harmony on the prison wing there. So that was Barry and Alex, and Alex felt he needed another number. So he took a can of contact adhesive, which was around for making soft, cuddly toys for charity, poured it over poor old Barry, had taped up a box of matches, the match heads, and flung that onto him. He went up in flames, and when the guards came in, which took a bit of doing, 3 sets of electronic doors, all programmed not to open all at once, poor old Barry was smouldering away there. And at the last I saw him, he was completely charred. I couldn't recognize the face. The long hair was gone, just a pair of eyes, and something that stayed with me, the swollen testicles the size of apples for some reason. Wow. And you know what he said to me? He said, Dave, don't let that bastard get to my stereo. He'll wreck it. So he was completely in another world. Yeah, I have heard of that before, haven't you? Burns victims, not quite a massive adrenaline is keeping them screened off from what must be extraordinary agony about to come. He died 2 hours later, by the way.
I saw a documentary, or I saw a movie years ago that was based on a guy in an Australian prison named Chopper. Do you ever hear?
Chopper, Mark Reed. Yeah, he was really funny. He was hilarious in a way. He had a good sense of things. The only man I know who could stand there and be stabbed 12 times and carry on a conversation.
That's a good skill to have in prison, I would imagine.
Yeah, he was sort of brushing down his front as Jimmy was plunging the knife into him. Not a very long knife, it must be said. Right. Prison shanks not, being made of what you can. And he was not really. He was a bit of a bottom feeder, I must say. He wasn't. He asked me about business. I said, Mark, look, I don't think you're really cut out for it. You're a bit of a show pony there. You stand out. Yep, I'll pay you the finder's fee of $5,000 for any couriers you come up with. But I learned, I should say, that that all sounds quite fair, but it often didn't work out. Some of the biggest crooks, sort of semi-mafiosi, would produce, I mean, a couple of times they produced a girl she was quite right for it, a bit dumpy, fairly plain looking, and not noticeable. And these crooks, of course, wanted to be paid her fee, and they wouldn't have paid her a dime. So I paid her myself and escorted her away from the airport, because I learnt there and in New York City that there's a way of dealing with organized crooks in a way that, I mean, I was organized, but from a different history, which you protect yourself not by two things. One, simply that you are worth more alive, and that really nothing. From time to time, some quite threatening people came along, and more or less were just asking me to give them money for nothing. And I'd have to say to them, look, just keep in mind that if something happens to me, even just something unpleasant, you'll be cutting off the income of a lot of very big people, and they won't be happy about it. So come to me with a proposition, something I can work out. But, you can't do what you do at the gambling clubs around town. Right. Collect on bets you win and don't pay on the ones you don't. So
yeah,
a quick sort of education of all of that. But things got, after I got released from the long stretch, just to finish this quick summary, I found that there was no peace. Now, I should say that during the early arrest, because there were no drugs found, the police kind of arrested everybody they could. They even arrested my mother. She was not locked up overnight, but on some pretext that her jewelry was stolen. It was just a nonsense charge, but just to put pressure on me. Mm-hmm. And also my business partner's wife, who was Colombian, she was under arrest and had a new baby. And my wife, Clelia, was under arrest. And this was, a bridge too far for sure. And I said to Michael, my business partner, look, I know the code says never plead guilty to anything, fight to the end, but we're going to have to do some kind of a deal to get the girls out. It's not fair on them. We can always escape. There's always that. But
there's always that.
Well, I used to offer it to the couriers. If things don't work out, you have the choice. I get the best sentence I can do, if not somehow lose the evidence. If that doesn't work, you have the choice of doing the sentence and being rewarded afterwards, or I'll get you out. And it was that kind of stuff, Charlie, that I liked, where something seemed, when I was young, people would say, you can't do this or it won't work. I suppose, have you ever heard writers and things say, I really enjoyed the research part, or film directors saying, it was my time figuring out the background of the story that I really enjoyed, not the actual making. And for me, it was the same in smuggling, cracking the way through. Careful observation made quite a difference. For example, if you get stopped by customs, Charlie, you'll notice something. The more professional of them work in teams. One is talking to you, and the other one has opened your bag. He's dropped the lid of the bag onto his hand to feel the weight. Then he puts it down. One by one, he'll pick up every object and move it to the top side, giving it a cursory look. Now, we know that they don't have time to saw everything in half or go and drug test everything. Well, they don't want to do that. What the first guy is talking to is waiting for the teddy bear, not that he knows it, to be lifted up by the checker, who looks at it and puts Teddy to a side. He will see your body language relax. Your shoulders come down. You're suddenly talking about how much you enjoyed your holiday and why the girls in Acapulco are so great. And he'll tap the one next to him. That was it. Last object. So there were a lot of kind of key lessons to be learned, but there were also jail survival lessons to be learned. Apart from when I was released from that long stretch, I found police all over me. And that's what I didn't finish telling you about having the girls in prison. They put an informer into the dormitory where they were to feed back information for the case. Unfortunately, the list of available informers must have been a bit small, and she also happened to be an arsonist. And great. She set fire to as a kind of protest, to this dormitory, which was an old one. It was wood with steel casing around the outside. You know, that's ideal, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The flames went up. Now, Michael and I were locked up. We were refused bail, and listening to an old prison radio that they'd shut off at midnight. And I heard about the fire at the women's prison, and then I heard that there were 3 deaths. And hang on, I'll just turn that off. And I came out in the morning, as you can imagine, asking, what's going on? And prison guards were being evasive. They weren't looking at me. And that tells you something, you know. Mm-hmm. If everything was okay. So Michael and I just wandered around in circles like zombies until we were called up for what they called a legal visit. Your lawyer's here. Both of us at the same time. Turned a corner, saw all our families there, and knew the worst had happened. Both of the girls had been killed, and the arsonist as well. So when I was released a decade later, I wouldn't say it wasn't so much a score to settle, but I'd kind of been drained. It had been a battle enough to get through that. But then when I found that the police had got some funding for another operation to chase me around, I just had enough. So I left the country. Was stopping in Thailand to pick up some money that I'd left there, and made that one careless telephone call. Well, not even the call wasn't so careless. I called a Chiang Mai nephew of one of the big Golden Triangle drug lords, and he then despite telling him all sorts of phone rules, and you can imagine how long they are. Mostly don't use them. He made a call that was picked up by the US DEA, and I was arrested leaving the country. Now they did a sweep of I had 2 false passports, $50,000, but that wasn't it. They managed to find about 50 grams of heroin by sweeping the airport floor. There's always plenty to be found. Yeah. That might sound evasive, Charlie, but I would have no problem admitting to that. But I only mentioned it not because of the great injustice of it all, bad luck for me, but it turned the case then into a death penalty case. So I spent 2 years there, and it was getting worse. The case was, I was going to be convicted, but it looked like the death penalty was going to be applied to a Westerner for the first time in many years. I had no choice. I had to try and figure out a way to escape. But I'd been planning that since the day I'd got in there. Oh, apart from killing myself, I should say. That's how bad I felt. Can you imagine 10 years in prison, and then you get out, and you can't even visit the grave of your wife because there's police around you. You back out of that. I went go on.
What did they want from you? You'd just done 10 years. What was the problem?
The problem was, I mean, they came to see me while I was in prison. They said, David, we used to like chasing you around. It was a bit more fun. You used to, fight back. If we had an electronic device, you had one. And, we didn't know if you were really there. For example, if another bit of tradecraft, when I left for Bangkok, I said to Michael, my business partner, look, here's my cell phone. When I go, you go to a payphone somewhere, you ring it, you answer it while you're standing in the payphone and play this tape. On the tape is you and I talking, having a little conversation, then hang up. I know this cell phone is tapped. So when the DEA was saying to the Australians, look, we've got him under our sights here, they were saying, no, we just recorded him. He's using his phone around town. He's disappeared for a bit, but it must mean he's got something on. So you ask, what did they want from me? The answer is, it's the economics of it. An old lawyer that I knew years ago said, David, the only way you can really combat them is to drain their resources. If they can get funded, they'll go after you. It doesn't matter what you've done or intend to do. It's just funding. If they've got nothing to show for it, and in the first, they usually give it about a month. The phone never goes, but I'll just turn it off here. All right. You can, if that, and the lawyer said, if that doesn't work, and they're really heavily funded, then you've got no choice. You've got to get out of town. But I was kind of arrogant then, and I thought, no, I can play their own game. So they were going to see what kind of network I'd put together. I didn't really have anything in mind, but once the chase was on, I felt kind of pushed into it. Yeah. And did.
So you leave Australia, you go to Thailand just on a quick you had no intention of staying in Thailand, or were you heading somewhere else? Were you just grabbing money there?
Yeah, I was, but when I got there, on arrival, I had an elaborately obtained false passport. It was a genuine one. I felt light as a feather. I was kind of tripping down the main road there. And the memories of my kind of good times in the old days, a decade earlier, were with me. And I sort of felt, well, what's the rush? Nobody's chasing me now. I should just settle here for a while, let things cool down. But a plan is a plan, Charlie. And if you've got it written down, you'll stick to it. I had the entry and exit stamps on thin plastic sheets ready to put into backup and third sets of passports. So much effort had gone into that. It's a big, I suppose it's like fighting battles. You hang on to the battle plan well past its useful point when you know it's really no good. So when it looked bad that not only was I going to lose the case, but I'd certainly end up on death row. And death row in Thailand is not easy.
It's firing squad, isn't it? I mean, ultimately, don't they just shoot you?
They use lethal injection now, but back at that time, they had a process. It didn't always apply all of it, but they certainly used this part. You're strapped to a plank, leaning backwards. A machine gun is welded to a bench top with 3 bits of string attached to the trigger. 3 officers all pull at once, so I guess they can each say, well, it wasn't me who pulled the trigger. Right. And machine gun fire will do it, which seemed to me preferable to hanging. I've seen a couple of hangings. Where I ended up next after that, hanging was the thing of choice. Now, the life in a Thai prison is, it's kind of like being in a mad children's nursery. They have this wild extremes of cruelty. For example, in the factories there, the 5 laziest workers making army boots or whatever it might be, they would be beaten every day. Now, somebody's going to be in those last 5. And there's a kind of formal cruelty of it too. You know, after each blow of the truncheon onto the small of the back, where they aim for between the vertebrae to give the maximum pain, the poor bugger that's being beaten has to say, "Thank you, sir, for correcting me," in Thai, of course. Yeah. Now, on the other hand, they could be, you know, quite charming in another way. I ended up with, I rented myself a little office, we'll call it, in one of the prison factories. There was a French guy who was our cook, a Swedish guy who'd come in on a couple of kilos, so he was looking at, they all end up with life sentences. Anything over 20 grams was a life sentence. And they'd usually end up signing up for a prisoner exchange. The Americans were never too happy about that, because the way they do it, in the beginning when they did prisoner transfers, they didn't work. Prisoners would get back to the US, apply to a court and say, "Well, I didn't do anything here, so why are you keeping me?" "Oh, yeah, but you signed this." "Doesn't matter, I was under duress. I'd say anything to get out of there." So what they did was had a deputized US magistrate from the embassy come out, and they'd plead guilty to a federal charge of possession with intent to supply of whatever the amount of the drugs were. So they had that conviction. But it meant getting the okay from the DEA, and they'd have to cooperate to some degree with them. My Hawaiian friend there, I said, "Look, just say yes and give them a whole lot of malarkey. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere anyway." Or tell them about their own syndicate, because the DEA were running operations then with a big group of Nigerians running dope to Chicago. They'd used couriers 3 or 4 times, and then on the last trip, they'd arranged to have them arrested at the airport. So they not only didn't have to pay them, but the DEA were happy that they were, making progress over there.
Getting their numbers up there.
Yeah, they certainly did. Now, I must have had about 50 escape plans, and most of them abandoned, because I realized towards the end that I could not fail. The only out of the 12,000 people in this huge Klong Prem central jail, the only people who'd ever even tried were, once they were caught, they were effectively tortured to death, put into steel boxes and dragged out of there and beaten senseless every day. They'd usually take about 2.5 months to die. I mean, they had a bowl of rice every day and a liter of water, but they didn't have much of an appetite for any of that. And the little boxes were like, those coat lockers you get at, industrial site or something. They were tiny with a letterbox slit. That was the only air, and in the heat. So I couldn't take the chance of being caught, and I realized that if I told anybody about it, that would be the end of it. The group that I'd seen try and fail had all lied to each other about what arrangements were over the wall, who was coming, somebody had planted a phone, there was rope that had been stashed by somebody, all a lot of nonsense. They just couldn't breach this, what was it, about a 30-foot wall, which had barbed wire on the top and electricity, and the whole prison was surrounded by a moat. About 20. It was part of the old sewerage system that ran around the entire prison except for a couple of little bridges. And 2 weeks before the end of my trial, I thought, well, it's never going to get any better. And I've been arranging things. They let you have care parcels. So I needed gaffer tape, I needed cable ties, I needed special glues and things like that. So they'd come in this huge parcel, and the guards had checked them. And they were pretty rough with the Thais who had stuff sent locally. They'd cut their soap bars in half, they'd squeeze out their shampoo onto newspaper. But with the foreigners, they were a bit better, especially since I'd give them a couple of cartons of cigarettes. And Michael had put in, he'd made 2 hacksaw blades into a scroll poster, which had accepted. And they thought it was kind of a religious thing. Well, it wasn't particularly religious. It was from National Lampoon's parody of Desiderata from the 70s. And then began, I had the only light switch in the place. Otherwise, the lights are on 24/7.
Oh, wow.
Dimmed the cell. I'd thinned it out. There was the American, the Swedish guy. My head butler, Little Jet, who was about 4'0", who controlled all the 15 people downstairs. They were mostly just kids that were in and had nothing, and so they carried the ice or fetched the water and whatnot, and began cutting away. And I can tell you that, there's the most realistic prison escape film I've ever seen. I'm trying to think of the town. I think it was upstate New York. 2 murderers, David Sweet and forget the other guy's name, and they spoke of the noise that cutting bars makes and banging at things. But you can imagine in an otherwise very quiet cell block, just the violin bow scrape of that hacksaw across the steel bars. It had to go very slowly. So by 2 a.m, I'm only cut 1/2 of 1 bar. So I had to cut through half of the other one. Sten, my Swedish Viking friend, who was massively strong, bent the other part back. I just managed to squeeze in. I had a bookshelf that became the plank because I didn't trust foreigners. They had us on the 3rd floor. So the plank had to jut out of the prison cell into the night sky. And then I had 100 meters of linen nylon army boot webbing, which became my rope, and I slung that over and then slid to the ground. I had some clever abseiling routine that didn't work and took a fair bit of my skin off my hands, but it didn't matter by then. I went to my office, I got out the rest of the stuff. The ladder was to be made of, 4 bamboo poles, very long ones, about 20 feet each, tapering to the top. I had to break into a factory in the middle of the night and get those, put rungs on the ladder. And the rungs were picture frames. Sten had pretended to take a sudden interest in oil painting, so he was making these very sturdy frames. They were gaffer taped together, and I had to lug these things through about 7 sub-prisons to get to the outer wall. We ended up completely lost, going past the AIDS, well, they call it a recovery ward. It was a death camp where they were all dying in there. You could actually smell it as you went past, a sort of necrotic flesh rotting away. But at least they didn't say anything. I think they were the only people who saw me that night. And they were too enfeebled to cry out. It was by the time I got that ladder against the outer wall, a glow of dawn was just coming. So I got up between 2 of the towers, sweating a bit. I could feel the electricity coming through from the barbed wire at the top. Got over, used my last bit of rope to get to the ground, and then found myself before the moat. But this moat, I the idea was I'd put all my street clothes. Prisoners weren't allowed to wear long pants in the jail. They cut them into shorts. And put all my street clothes in plastic bags, swim across the moat, dry myself off, and then go on. But I knew that those houses were all full of guards. That's where they lived. They didn't live far from work. So I threw that away, and it started to rain a little bit. And I produced one thing that was very lucky for me, an umbrella from the umbrella factory, which was nominally where I, as prisoner number XXX, had to work. But I think somebody else did that work for me. And but I had a pop-up umbrella, which I popped up, and then walked towards the front gate, because I figured a lot of people, it's about 6:15, would be coming and going, and I could cross that bridge if I kept my umbrella low. I felt like Ripley in Alien, as she's trying to change into a spacesuit, saying to herself, "Lucky, lucky, lucky." And I was saying the same thing as I tilted that umbrella up. I don't know why I bothered to look up, because what could I have done? But there were a couple of guards looking down. But the pants I put on, Charlie, were khaki, so they were that brown color that the guards wore, and they probably, I was hoping they'd assume I was a guard coming in late and getting through the back way. Crossed over, walked to the top of the pedestrian bridge over the 5-lane highway to the airport, looked back, and suddenly almost 2 years just evaporated. I look back on all those people in their lost souls, being in there forever, but had to get going. Went to an apartment that was, I had the keys to, which were hidden in a little tag that I'd made, so that if I was caught and tortured, they wouldn't be asking me whose keys are these. Then went into the bathroom and started feeling behind the mirror. Now, there's supposed to be a passport there. Can you imagine? You've met some guy in jail. He was Chinese Australian. And he'd said to me, I'd given him an old photograph. And his name was Charlie too. Good guy. He said, "I'll get you please don't try and escape, it won't work, but I'll get you this passport. But remember that it'll only be good for 3 weeks. It has to be entered into the computer at the airport, and I have to get the tourist visa slip put into it, and it's got to be stamped in, and all sorts of things with ultraviolet inks on the passport." So I'm feeling for this thing. I thought, how many times have people taken money from me and promised things? Dozens. I probably went through 50,000 or something that friends had put up to get me out, and nothing had come of it. Is this passport going to be there? Well, I'm talking to you now, and so it was. But it was still quite a nervous moment getting through the airport there and having that wonderful feeling of the door closing and it taking off into the sky.
Where were you headed?
Well, I didn't have many options. I had given most of my cash to the guys in the cell to protect themselves come morning. But I had 2 ATM cards. I put one in, keyed it up. What? Contact issuing bank. No, that's not what I want to hear. That's not good. The other one paid out about 500. So how far could I go on 500? I went to Singapore. Sure, they'd hand me back if they discovered me, and death penalty there as well. But it turned out that was a good choice, because once the DEA found out that I'd jumped the wall, they ran down to the airport and, well, imagine you're them. You know this guy's, he's jumped out. He's bound to be going to the airport or hiding up country. So let's just say the airport one. He's got off on a flight there. How do you find him? On which flight? Well, what they did was go to all the airline counters and ask them for the names of all the passengers from Western countries that had left that morning, and they took those names, and ran them through the list of stolen or misreported lost passports for the last 6 months. Mm-hmm. So really, that Singapore flight put me there 2 hours later, I was on the ground, even though I wasn't really quite happy with the passport, but it was good enough. If I'd have taken a long haul, they would have had that name and been waiting for me on the flight to Canada or Europe or wherever I would have gone. So I had a bit of luck with me that day, and cleared the airport, checked into a hotel, went to the hotel shop, bought some swimming trunks. I went to the top floor swimming pool and dived right in, kept under that cool water long enough to drag myself out the top and have a think, where to next? Well, wow. Onward and upward, I thought. Hell, maybe I should have just... Well, I couldn't really retire. I'd racked up some favors getting out of this place, so it was back to work again. If I'd have known then that within a couple of years I would have found myself in a dungeon in Karachi, I think I might have thrown myself off the top of that hotel rather than take the dive into the pool.
How do you wind up in a dungeon in Karachi?
Well, you know, they say no good deed goes unpunished, and I think I'd gone back to work. One thing about the drugs world, you travel through, you get arrested a few times, and you end up with your address book is kind of full of interesting names. So I had now friends in Colombia, some old ones who were still around, met a lot of couriers who'd been sent by various people. So I knew a lot of people. I even tried to buy Bobby Locke's famous Japanese address book. You know, the price for weed there is about $30,000 a kilo.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. And, you know, I said, Bob, you're out of the business. Sell me that address book. You know, no, all right. Of course, he was a bungler and it didn't work out. But you do have the connections to go around. So, got myself a bunch of... I ended up, after I left Bangkok, I thought, look, I can't really trust anything at the moment while it's so hot. So I flew to Pakistan, and in Balochistan there, which is a province of it, they're kind of different people, very tribal. They've got their own independence movement. They want to be different. And a local chieftain there, Mir Jahan, Lord Magsi, from the Magsi clan, he sort of protected me for a few months there. But they were all kind of smugglers down there along the Macroaggressions coast. It was interesting going down. What his lordship used to do with me, he'd be doing business with locals, and I'd stand over to the side, being the Western contact. So I don't know what stories he used to make up about me, but my job was just to nod and look serious from time to time. And I was doing some business across the border in Afghanistan there for a while. And I sort of had a nemesis within the DA. I could never really understand it, but for some reason, a young guy called Bill Schenkman took an interest in the big Australian case because he'd been chasing one of the Golden Triangle biggies. There were about 4 of them for quite a few years. And I had been doing business with well, I suppose, one of the biggies, his nephew. Now, I didn't know the background story to all of this, but I found out later on that a DE agent who was stationed at Chiang Mai had got extracurricular and started going to farmers and trying to get information out of them. And this Thai drug dealer's, his uncle, who was the big man, had arranged to scare the DEA man off by grabbing the guy's wife, driving her around town a bit, letting her go, spook him out, he'll stop adventuring. The plan didn't go too well. Some traffic cop stopped the van, and the maid started screaming. So the traffic cop looked at this American woman and a very nervous driver in a VW Combi van. More or less, they both started to go for their guns at once. The cop was dead, the car stalled. Go forward a few hours, and there's a big standoff. The place is surrounded. The kidnapper had put copper wire around the trigger of his revolver, holding back the gun with his thumb. Idea being, if you shoot me, it'll go off and the wife will be killed. So everybody's got an interest in this. You can imagine what was going on at the US Embassy. You know, they're being very insistent on, we want these guys alive, we want to know who's behind it, we've got a pretty good idea, but we want somebody to say so. Arrangements were made. The number 3 guy up north had got in touch with kind of the commando unit of the Thai army, who were to let an exchange for the wife go ahead with a local monk who was a bit of a TV star. He was going to swap positions. And then the gunman was to be shot by one of the commandos. It all happened except for the weather. His thumb was sweating.
Oh,
yeah. It slipped, the gun went off, she's dead. Commando's on the radio, what do I do? Kill him. So he was dead. But the DEA and the State Department were utterly convinced it was the uncle who was behind it. They were certain. And it eventually had him killed locally. Chauffeur, flat tire, uncle gets out to look, truck comes along, end of uncle. But that wasn't the end. This curse went to all people connected with him, even though I knew nothing about any of this at the time. It gave enough impetus for Bill Schenkman to keep following me and offering bits of information. Because really, Charlie, I'd been a low-level smuggler in a sense. We're talking kilos at the most, 5, 6, something like that. Mm-hmm. Maybe 5 times a year, isn't it? It's not huge, but I think too, because I'd fight back technically to try and defeat the surveillance, I was useful to test new systems on. The phone tapping in Thailand was an example of that. And Bill at the DEA got a bit of funding, and I'd see him from time to time. When I was arrested in Karachi, he was behind that. He came to have a bit of a gloat, but really, you know, he didn't have much to say. This is the strange, and you'd expect, and in the movies, you know, the cop or Bruce Willis, or even if he's a kind of not so nice cop, gets a couple of good lines, but oddly enough, at that moment of their victories, they were embarrassed, if anything. So Bill introduced me to somebody of the younger generation, another policeman to take over his role. You know, there's 6,000 of them after all. Yeah. And once again, I was facing the death penalty in a place which was so completely alien, in the sense that I just didn't understand how people approach things. It is a short, sharp, and perhaps brutal education to another country's culture to go into their prison systems. And that is what happened with me. I mean, there's half a dozen languages spoken there. Oh, they have by the way, they have I was arrested at the airport, supposedly linked to a courier from some months earlier. That charge melted away, but a couple of things worth noting to your viewers. If they ever find themselves arrested in India or Pakistan, you can say what you like to the police. Make it up, of course. Don't get anybody in trouble and never snitch. But they will torture you if they think you're not being cooperative. But it doesn't matter what confession you make, because it's never admissible in courts. The courts there, and they're all conducted in English, by the way, hangover from the Raj era, they don't accept statements made to police because they know they're all obtained under duress or a lot worse.
Interesting.
I didn't know that, and I was holding out. And it didn't help that one of the guy that used to get me passports had got himself in trouble as a courier, and then said very unhelpful things to the head of the anti-narcotics force in Karachi. Oh, David, he's got big mafia connections. He'll have you killed. You don't want to mess with him. Now, that was only a challenge to this guy. He was very independent. He was the educated son of a rich family and been given this plum government job. In between slapping me around his office, he was, sitting there being chatty about, do you ever like pan? Pan is a kind of betel nut thing that people chew there and then spit it out in big red globules at everything under 3 feet off the ground. And I can tell you, it's, things are not going well when you get taken into a kind of underground set of offices, and as you walk along the corridor, you see a low-hanging bar there, suspended from the ceiling. And as you take a seat in somebody's office there was a trolley with a 24-volt truck battery and alligator clips. I mean, 12 would have been bad enough. 24, have you ever asked yourself, and I'm sure people watching must have done this, asked yourself some awful question, how would I survive this, or how could I cope with that? And don't ask yourself that question. Dismiss it, because fate will always provide you with an answer to the depths of your ability to accept. And I'd often wondered about torture and why. I mean, I knew it was an evil thing and it's something extraordinarily bad. I wrote a book about those times, Unforgiving Destiny, and it took something like 10 years to absorb in all of that experience there, and also even to very specifically say what's going on with torture. It's that what makes it so bad is it's very dependent on time and something repeated. Okay, they messed around with they beat the soles of your feet, then they put the alligator clips on in interesting positions. They didn't even have it connected, so when they first crunched it into a nipple, I jolted thinking it was electricity, but it wasn't. And they got a good laugh out of that. That goes in the little joke book of torturers. We had this guy, and we didn't even have the damn thing connected, and he was jumping all over the place. The reason I found myself, I had a bit of my luggage there, trying to unscrew the blade of a pencil sharpener so I could cut my wrists. The reason I couldn't, I knew I'd be going back for more sessions with them, of questioning, and they didn't really care about the answers. That was the thing. And it's that rewires your brain. People who've come out of that, I can understand it. And it seems the ultimate perversion of villainy that one person can do to another is not only to do something physically bad or to mistreat them or be unjust, but to get into somebody's brain and rewire them. I had my ear pressed against the crack in the cell door, listening to every footfall, every person walking past, because I knew the guard that was in charge of taking me there had a certain kind of scrape of foot, and his keys sounded in a particular way, rattling against him. and after a few, I really don't know. Luckily, somebody came and intervened. It was an English policeman, as a matter of fact. He happened to be there on another business, and then said, well, oh, you've got him. Well, and I told him what was going on. And then he went back to the chief investigator and said, look, you can't really do this kind of thing to our citizens. We don't care what you do, but you can't do this sort of thing. Which was reasonable of him. I mean, I think if it had been old Bill from the DEA, he would have come back with a couple of extension cords and sharpening up those alligator clips. So I found myself facing trial and had to learn that no cases ever finish there, that you just have to wait it out until you get bail, and then you're outside. And oh, that's right. Another thing worth knowing about India, Pakistan is everybody has to be given bail no matter what the case is after 2 years. So relax for that time, get to know the place, learn a few languages, learn Sindhi and Baluchi and Urdu, the marketplace language, and oh, and they have a class system, which is another hangover from the Raj era there. C class, regular rebel, dormitories of 160, sleeping on the ground, hole in the corner for a toilet, eating just beans and gritty bread. But this B class, which is for taxpayers, educated people, I don't know, I mean, it's a strange thing to come about, but I think it came into existence because the colonial administrators thought, well, the day might come one of us ends up in a jail there. We better have some provision for it. Oh, and A class were the political prisoners, a different thing altogether. So I set myself up. I got myself a better class of accommodation, which gave me a bed and a cell, and pretty relaxed about it. A guard went shopping every day. You'd give him money. And you had servants. But these were kind of almost semi-official prison servants. And those prisoners would have to bribe the guard to get the job. Why? Because they had nothing and nobody and couldn't eat properly. And so being a servant was a great thing to be to somebody with a little money, because not only did you eat better, you might actually go to court. The thing is there, it was worse than Thailand in the sense, to even go to court, you'd have to bribe the trustee to put you on the list. You'd have to bribe the driver who took you to the court. You'd have to bribe the court guards to let you out of the van. You'd have to bribe the clerk of the courts to list you before a judge. And then you come to the judge himself, who was another grade. So these poor servants, some of them, one I had, he'd been in for 5 years on a gun charge. The same gun, incidentally, that about 30 of them were all sharing over the years. It became so well known, this particular grainy photocopy of a gun that didn't exist and was clearly out of a catalogue from Gun Love magazine or something, that as soon as judges saw it, they used to laugh amongst each other and dismiss the case and let the guy go. But
where do you get the money to bribe all these people?
Oh, they usually, it depends on your embassy. The British embassy are utterly useless, but their consular staff are very good at bringing your cash in secretly and giving it to you at court. So you go back to the prison, you've got it in your pocket, you take out 500 rupees, inquire solicitously to the welfare of the searching guard's family, and here's a little tea money for the day. Now he knows you've got a pocket full, but he's a reasonable guy, he does this job all day. don't hold out on him, I should say, because you'll need that money inside. And also, don't be careless with it. You'll get a lot of offers as soon as you come in. If you're a Westerner, somebody will come in and say to you, and probably another Westerner, Charlie, look, first time here, look, you don't really belong. I can get you out of this pit, and it's going to cost you, though, $10,000. Now, it won't cost you anything like that. It's more like $500 tops. And remember, you'll be paying again when they spend that money, so don't make it too much. Make it weird sums like 200 and give them 175 and have some friend come and see you. You do need friends, you know. I suppose, and that I should say to little scoundrels who are in the underworld business, keep your friends. Do not rat them out. You'll need them one day. They will need you, you know. You have to have somebody out there to do it. I did, I mean, some people lived extraordinarily well there. The man who's, I think he's Prime Minister, no, he's President today, Asif Zardari of Pakistan. He was in there at the time, as was the chairman of the Mehran Bank, 2 people from the ISI spook agencies, and a few other top government people. One of them, the bank guy, he was known to have swindled 250 million US. And I said to him, man, look, surely you can get your case dealt with. He said, David, I don't want my case dealt with. I've built a house here, which he had. He had the whole house built inside the prison. Had satellite dishes, air conditioning. I used to go over there for the big Sunday lunch. And and met some interesting people. And the conversation was all in English, which is an official language of Pakistan, but also so that the servants wouldn't understand what we were saying. There was a couple of very deep agency people under arrest there for something, and they looked quite terrifying. I wouldn't want to be in their hands, big question. One of them was on multiple murder charges, and the witnesses were disappearing on a weekly basis. Oh, so he was there for the alibi. But the chairman of the bank, he didn't want to, he used to go, he had his house there. He used to list himself for court every day in a special banking court. The Mercedes would pick him up, take him down there. He'd rented an office so he could hold court during the day, and he was safe. He used to pay his own guards extra to look after him.
It's the Pakistani Jeffrey Epstein.
Yes, I guess so, except he wasn't so driven to despair as I've always thought when I see that Epstein, you know, the look of a broken man, don't you think, in those last mugshots? This is somebody...
Good.
Who, oh, yes, perhaps good, but... well, I say that because I don't think it was necessary to arrange some dark operation to make it look like suicide, because he must have been so close to it anyway. He could have been, what do you mean, Hannibal Lectered, as it were, you know, yeah, pushed over the edge by a few psychological cues. I mean, that'd be an interesting job, wouldn't it? Say, Charlie, you're assigned to dreaming up ideas to shift people from one mental state to another. Mind you, that's what you're doing here. You're opening the world to them, aren't you? But not with an agenda, as those people were. So this guy didn't want to go out because he knew he would have been kidnapped and held to ransom for his money, and mostly by his own family.
Wow.
They were cruel. So it took some doing to just relax enough to deal with that. But you know what I did? I asked myself another one of those silly questions, and that was, you know, there's parts of this place that aren't so nice. There's what they call the bund ward, the closed ward. This is where they bring in the middle-class sons of families that weren't expecting to, and they torment them until their families come up with quite large amounts of money. And I thought, oh, I wonder what it's like in there, really. So I ended up with a dispute over a prison governor over my cell phone. Oh, we all had them, but they made a point. I refused to pay any longer above what I thought was a good rate for my accommodation, especially since I had official status as and ended up being my cell was raided and I was disappeared. I was thrown in a van and ended up in a dungeon somewhere up in Hyderabad, and for 6 weeks was in solitary with not really knowing whether it was light or day. The only bit of I knew one guard from the south who got me some bedding, and that was it. I didn't mind. It was quite, I wouldn't say relaxing, but 6 weeks with no contact with anything, it was a bit of a break. I was saved from there eventually. My old friend, nobody could help me. The judge was insisting that I be produced. The superintendent of the Karachi jail said, "Oh, well, he didn't want to come to court." Oh, just making up stories. But my friend, his lordship, found out where I was. The superintendent of this Hyderabad prison, who was always after money, would send me messages. I was called up to his office, and I thought, oh, he's upping the stakes here. He's really going to put the pressure on. And when I went into his office, he was there, the prison chief, handing me a cup of tea and smiling all over the place, because who I hadn't seen in the corner there was his lordship, Mir Jahan Magsi, who'd found out where I was, came from Balochistan, had his armed guards all with their rifles slung over their shoulders in the prison governor's office. And it was all politeness and niceness from there on. So I met some interesting people there. There were some Russian hijackers. They'd stolen a plane from a Siberian local place and ended up in Pakistan. Some other people who were kind of eye-openers about their own dealing with solitary, and they had a trick with sensory deprivation. Some of these big political leaders who were breakaway movement heads, they couldn't torture them in a normal way. When I say normal, I mean physically. But they used to bind them up from head to toe in cloth, so they had no sense of feeling, with mittens on and hoods. One of them told me that a guard one night took pity on them and took the two of them out to a grassed area. He didn't dare take their hoods off, but he unbound their feet. And he said, Dave, the feel of that cool grass between my toes that night is something that'll stay with me forever. So, would I trade any of the insights for a happier life? Probably. It's kind of worn me out a bit, because it took a very elaborate set of things to get out of the trouble in Pakistan. I even had release papers at one stage from the court, but the prison chief just wasn't letting me go. They do that sometimes.
Oh my God.
Holding out for money. You know what you have to do? The guy who came to pick me up, we had to find somebody who wouldn't look like he had money, or the prison chief would say, "No, you want David, you come and bring me thousands." We sent down a guy who was a kind of local priest, you could say, not a fanatical one, but a kind of respected one, who just said, "Look, I've been asked, he's got no family here, I've been asked to pick him up. Money? No, if that's the case, I'm going." "Oh, well, a little." And he gave him like 500 rupees, which is like $7 or something. And that was it. I was out. So at every stage, there's a particular hymn sheet, songbook. If you don't know all these things, you end up tearing your hair out. And so I was released from there and went to Scandinavia then. And
what year is this that you get released in Pakistan?
I'm released there in 2000. And I suppose I was still kind of in the business for another 10 years, but with no major arrests. And then as I was getting into my 50s, I just didn't have the energy for it. Also, the Berlin Wall came down and the whole world changed, and the terrorists made it very, as George Bush used to say, the tourists.
Yeah.
That made smuggling by air really impossible. And also, I just got bored with it. It was just like working a regular job, but not interesting, you know.
Yeah. So you mentioned the DEA and this maniac from the DEA following you all over the world and everything. They're running the drugs in conjunction with the CIA, correct? I mean, they're involved in this. They're not really busting people. I mean, they're busting people, but they're not trying to stop the flow of drugs, right?
No. They have their own interests. They're a government agency. They're full of people. Those people have careers. They do whatever it is that makes their life successful. And if there are some people who are passionate about stopping drug supply, that would have been beaten out of them with the realization very shortly that they just make no difference. They can make it more difficult sometimes, but if they're only intercepting 5% and still being criticized for not really doing anything, they have to get down and get dirty, and then they realize that this is more interesting. I mean, we're all just people. You'll find a lot of people in the smuggling world can have quite, well, I wouldn't say amiable, but civilized conversations with their opposite numbers, as long as they're not like Bill Shankman and all obsessed and personally bothered and whatnot. Right. Because we're in the same business. They don't face the risk of going to prison, but then they don't get necessarily the rewards. They might get small rewards, but on the other hand, they have to, if we had a kind of Excel spreadsheet with bad things at the top, lying, cheating, stealing, entrapment, generating crimes that otherwise wouldn't exist, they would tick as many of the boxes as the other side would. I've never found in 40 years in that trade anything very much that resembled Narcos or I mean, I like Breaking Bad as much as anybody who's got a taste for seeing somebody pushed to the extremes and having to nut his way out of it in some fashion. But the reality of it, just think of people that are in business of some kind with more pressure and doing other things. Sure, there's some people who go into it who are violent-natured and have the wrong idea about it, but they have very short lives. They're either imprisoned forever and nobody wants to help them, or end up dead themselves because they've traded shots with the wrong person. It's very much the exception. Most of the, and I suppose too, the real thing that put me off getting too big is because it's boring. I was never any good at hanging on to money anyway. But the bigger you get, the more you're on a wage. You end up working for somebody else. There's Colombians here in London who will tell you exactly what this week's street price is. They can arrange to have it. They know what you're likely to make. And if you break it down, who was that? Was it Malcolm Gladwell or no? It was some other guys who wrote a book on. I think it was called Freakonomics or something.
Yes, Stephen Levitt and.
Yes, that's right. But one of the bits of take-home messages was that I think the chapter was called "Why Do Drug Dealers Live with Their Moms?" And it was pretty much how a lot of people really don't make much better than a good wage when it's stripped down and evened out, and the lean times and taking out jail time. So if you get too big, you're just part of a machine that you can't control, and always subject to others' errors. It doesn't matter what, really. I mean, so many times I tell people, here's a phone, this is how you use it. And pretty much you don't use it. This is the backup phone, and it's only the very first call you get is, oh, I know I'm ringing you on this one, but I rang you on the emergency phone because I knew you'd pick that one up. You can be as clever as you think you are, and it'll always be undone by something. But, you know, it is weakening after a while. And also, our lives are short, aren't they? There's a lot of things I wanted to do, I never did. There's some things I want to write. I've had a couple of books out, one on the escape from Thailand.
Tell us about the books, because they're available. I know they're available on Amazon right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to record the narration for it, but my day job, putting up CCTV cameras and, you know, odd thing, Charlie, around London, in my work coat, I've got the keys for about 100 apartments and houses. And on my phone, I can click in on and get the video into dozens of people's homes. And I thought, why would they particularly seek me out and trust me with this stuff, knowing my background? Mm-hmm. I think what it is they can see on the public record that I don't give away secrets. And with somebody whose name is as blackened as mine, mm-hmm. I've got nothing to gain. People can't hold anything over me because it's all out there. My name's Mud anyway. I mean, I'm quite the leper, really, Charlie. That National Geographic won't do a Locked Up Abroad on me. I don't have the...
Why? Why the hell not? Jesus Christ.
They've had junior producers look at it twice. And the big ones at the top say, this guy is not... We only want broken wrecks. We'll take the mafia hitman, providing he's a snitch and on the witness protection program. But we don't want somebody who seems to have shrugged it off. Well, didn't really. I mean, bear in mind that when I was so exhausted when I was arrested in Bangkok after that long stretch, I wanted to escape, all right, but I only wanted to escape so I could go to the top of the Dusitani Hotel and throw myself off. You couldn't even kill yourself in that place. But there's not many media outlets that will accept anybody who even has a moment to make light of the drug world. And
wow. I would think you'd be perfect for it because of the fact that you can make light of it and you can explain it in a way that, I mean, listen, you're not glorifying it in any way. You do it with a nice sense of humor and a good laugh about it. But my guess is that there was few laughs as you're getting the bottom of your feet caned in some dungeon in Karachi or some shithole in prison in Bangkok. I mean, I would imagine there's no glorifying of this, really. It's just an explanation with a knife from a guy who can paint a picture, you know.
I tried to. I won't bang on about the books because, you know, I don't want to be plugging them. I'm exhausted by that too.
Plug them. I don't care. People need to buy. I mean, Jesus Christ! If people aren't going to, you know, if people want to buy a book and read a story, you know, people can make, you know, fictional stories. This is fantastic. I mean, it's horrible that you went through it, but it is a crazy, original, true story.
Some people have said, oh, I don't want to, even if he only gets 2 cents in the dollar, I don't want to give this scumbag any reward for all of this. But that's kind of shooting the messenger. In Unforgiving Destiny, I've wrapped up the 40-year career in 400 pages, and that's probably a good place for people to put their toe in the water of, and you can kind of see my blunders coming and see that no matter how much trouble I went to try and find a solution, destiny would always deal some weird card to take it off. So, and also, I mean, we're speaking now for a couple of hours, but it's taken a bit of practice to really express clearly and quite quickly how much of a contrast some worlds were. For example, there was an English guy arrested, a Londoner, arrested in, after I got out of the dungeon in Hyderabad, I was sent to another Karachi prison. I arranged myself. I was living in a small section with an Air Force captain and a Christian tax collector. And I didn't realize how much I'd absorbed myself into that world. So I sent for the Englishman who didn't know me, and he was being leeched off by his local partner, a notorious gambler, and getting him to sell his family home and all of that. When he arrived and I spoke to him, he looked confused, and our servants brought him over to the table. And I said, well, we usually have a gin and tonic this time of the afternoon, but the food will be along in a well-kept little garden area that we had. But because I was speaking with an English accent, he burst into tears and hugged me. You can imagine if you met, you'd been in like you can imagine soldiers in Vietnam who'd never seen another American for a long time, how emotional they'd get at having a moment. And also, I think he felt better because he was hugging me because he thought there's a way out. Not everybody is finished in this. And to write those sort of things clearly took a bit of distance and perspective. And I think it's, you get, I became very forgiving of other people. That somebody asked me once, well, what about that guy from Boston who took that $60,000 from your friends and then pretended he was getting medical papers to get you out of prison? Aren't you going to hunt him down like a dog? I thought, no, I'm not. I'll tell you for why. Old Dean Reed, when I was at my lowest and I wanted to kill myself, I half knew he was shitting me. He was too smooth. He had con man written all over him. But he gave me hope. Whatever he stole from me wasn't theft. It was payment and services for saving my life in a way. So it is not a... If people think it's a traditional world where somebody crosses you, you're going to hate them forever and have, cutthroats from Argentina come and dispose of them. You spend dark enough and long enough, you won't feel that way towards other people. And even when you're cheated, sometimes you've set yourself up to be cheated. You've seen it coming, and you've let it happen. Should you punish somebody else for that? I don't know. So I think if anybody can take away anything kind of good from all my disastrous doings, is that you get a little more understanding about human frailty. And you know what the guy said to me, the Bostonian who was fleecing me? He said, David, you'll never overcome an alien world unless you learn to love these people. And I didn't understand what the hell he was talking about. But okay, I'm not that warm and cuddly. I don't think I loved anybody too much. But you have to drop your guard to become... I mean, this Englishman that came to this place where we were, that hugged me, he didn't even recognize me. I was dressed like a local. I had a little sort of token moustache and whatnot. But you'll never survive the bad things without swimming in to the other people's world. There's some quite big crooks I came across. When they were in those Asian hellholes, they fell to damn pieces because they weren't on, East 55th Street or in South LA or wherever, they were at home. It take away that world, and they were too tightly wound to survive in anything else. And I suppose, if nothing else, I'm alive, and everybody else connected with that world and my life then, they're all gone. So
it's crazy. It's a crazy story. You can find David McMillan's books on Amazon, Unforgiving Destiny and Escape. There's multiple books there. I encourage people to check it out, David. We could do this for 12 hours, as I know you have with Sean Atwood. So if people want to get into the depths of this, the books are available. You can find Sean's True Crime podcast that tackles this topic in great detail. This is the craziest story I've ever heard, without a doubt. And the way you deliver it is amazing. David, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, that's great, Charlie. It's good to be here. And I'll look for more of your stuff. It sounds like you've got some interesting people on board.
We're working on it. The show is only as good as the people that come on as guests. So I have a feeling this one is going to get a lot of attention. I'm going to receive tons of emails, and something tells me I'll have to have you back on for a recap. So thanks a lot, David. I appreciate it.
No, that's great. All right, people. We'll meet again, perhaps.